So today on the Zing Wellbeing podcast, I'm so excited to say that we're here with Karina Savage, who is an amazing nutritionist for kids and has her own website called Nourish with Karina. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, it's so exciting. I mean, I think that obviously nutrition for ourselves is super important because we want to live a long, healthy life. But nutrition for our kids is just critical, isn't it?
Absolutely. And a lot of parents are concerned about their children's nutrition, but sometimes actually making it happen, making them healthier can be more challenging than we would like.
Absolutely. And I think that, where we struggle with ourselves as well, knowing what's good and knowing what's bad because the supermarket's so full of convenience and processed food. It's the same with our kids, right? We don't necessarily know what they should or shouldn't be eating, which could be really impacting their health.
It's really hard in this day and age, especially with our current food standards in Australia, to know exactly what a healthy food product is. Sadly, at the moment, food manufacturers can be quite deceptive with foods on the supermarket shelf, and they can label things in a way that make them appear really healthy, but they're not. So it just makes it even harder for parents to try to work out what is healthy and what isn't. And I think, we know that our kids should eat more fruits and vegetables and they should eat, less of these processed foods. But actually how to make it happen is often where the struggle lies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to touch on what you just mentioned there about the labelling and the confusion around it. There's been a lot of talk around the 5-star health rating and not being as clear cut as we used to think. Can you talk a little bit about that so people know that if you're in a supermarket and there's something which doesn't look like it should have a 5-star health rating, but hey, it's there, how can we better equip ourselves with that?
Trust your gut. If it looks like it shouldn't have a 5-star health rating, it probably shouldn't. And I think there needs to be a big overhaul of the rating system, especially with respect to children's food. Yeah. I don't trust it, to be honest with you. I know that companies have a way of getting extra stars by adding a bit of extra fibre in or reducing the salt a tiny bit. They can work the system basically to make a product, I think, appear healthier than it is. Yeah. So some products that get 5-star health ratings, I wouldn't give a 5-star health rating to. Yeah. And I think it's because also the health star rating system is based on some rules, but those rules potentially need to change because I don't think those rules factor in certain things like artificial sweeteners. A product loaded with an artificial sweetener that I don't think is a healthy artificial sweetener has now just been given a 5-star health rating because it's lower in sugar, it's lower in salt. So it ticks all the boxes to get the 5-star health rating, but I don't believe it should because I think the rules need to expand to include new additives that are, being put in our children's food.
Yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it? And I know that it's easy to say, but I try and go for my own kind of health and my kids is try and eat fresh whole food as much as possible because as soon as something starts going into that processed field, it changes, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's really important to try and look at the food label. So I do a lot of stuff on Channel 7 Sunrise and I'm often just saying keep the ingredients list short.
Yeah.
Keep it to foods that are real ingredients, foods that you recognise. If you don't know the name of that ingredient or what that is, it's probably not a good thing for your child to have. So try to keep the ingredients list as short as possible. Keep it with real food. And that really applies to muesli bars, to ice creams, to everything. So I understand that as busy parents, we will often need to lean on packaged foods and kids are wanting these packaged foods. You just look in a child's lunchbox and there's so much packaged food that is now in many children's lunchboxes. And so our children are wanting what their friends are having, but it's about trying to choose a healthier option instead of perhaps that really poor, junky, coloured food. Yeah. So it's looking for something similar, but that's got a much shorter ingredients list, a much healthier ingredients list, and trying to avoid those foreign names and numbers and additives and preservatives because that's, I think, where we get into trouble with these processed foods. They've got a lot of ingredients in there that we really don't know what they're doing to our bodies or our children's bodies. And sure, the food standards allow them. They're what we call GRAS, generally regarded as safe. But I've got a real problem with especially artificial colours that are in our foods in Australia. In the UK, they have to have warning labels on foods, on children's food, that has one of the 6, I guess, more dangerous artificial colours. Whereas in Australia, we don't have that legislation. So they can really put whatever they want in our children's food with no warning labels, and our children are just guzzling it down. And we're none the wiser really as parents, because we're not warned about this, and our food standards allow them. Our food standards also do not have any limits on how much salt or sugar can be added to baby, toddler or children's food. There's no, which is why 90% of our Australian food failed to meet international health, WHO, World Health Organization standards.
That's shocking.
It's shocking.
It is. I mean, but why is that? Because I always think wrongly that Australia is ahead of the game with health and food and it's quite progressive. But you say this, and it's clearly not.
It's not, and there needs to be a big overhaul. And it's really frustrating that we can't rely on food standards to keep our children at least a little healthy. I mean, I know that the onus is on us as parents to give them mostly healthy food, unprocessed foods, healthy foods that's going to be rich in plant fibres, because really, I mean, I have a specialty in gut health. I love gut health, and gut health is a centre of our health in 100%. General.
I'm a huge advocate for gut health.
And so these unprocessed whole foods are going to really stimulate the growth of all the healthy bacteria in our gut and ensure that our children have a really strong, robust immune system. And this processed food is actually damaging our children's immune system, so damaging the gut microbes. And so it's a minefield. But I think trying to stick to whole food as much as possible, but limiting those processed foods. And when you do buy them, trying to choose the ones that have recognisable ingredients is a really good place to start.
Absolutely, but I don't think that most parents know this. I think that most people think that if it's on the shelf in the supermarket, it must be okay, because it wouldn't be allowed to be on the shelf. And I think this is where, talking to you is so important, because it's about education, right? The more we can learn, and it's not about shaming anyone with going, you're not feeding your kids good or whatever like that. It's about education, so you can make the choices. And even for us, I'll make really good health choices the majority of the time, but sometimes I don't. And I kind of, that's my informed choice. I know that if I'm going to eat this something over here that isn't great, I don't do it all the time, so I don't beat myself up. But I think with kids and the choices that we as parents buying food, we need to be informed, so we know we're making kind of an informed decision on what they are or aren't eating. And I think that's where understanding labels is so important, and understanding what's in them. And I think that a lot of people just don't. A lot of people are busy parents, and they're running around, and they're just, working, trying to pack lunch boxes, trying to feed kids, and they're not thinking about, this could have some carcinogenic product in, or it could have something which may cause health issues longer down the line. And it's important to talk about it.
It is, and I think it's because as parents we're in survival mode all of the time. And so we were only talking about it before, we're racing around here and there, and it's just another thing we've got to do. And I talk to parents, I've got a Nourishing Kids membership, and inside that I'm always talking to parents about, or mums, because it's for mums, about choosing one simple actionable task that you can do today that will make a difference. And one small habit change to how you're feeding your child will make a massive difference over the days and the weeks and the months. And it might be as simple as adding some fruit next to breakfast, or swapping from white bread to wholemeal bread, or one of each. I think sometimes feeding kids can seem so overwhelming, and trying to improve their health can seem so overwhelming. We can feel a lot of guilt around that, and that's not fair as parents, because as parents we are trying to do the best we can every day. So I never want parents to feel guilty about what their children are currently eating, but I think if you can focus on one simple actionable change that you can make today, that will make a big difference in the long run. And then that helps you gain momentum, right? So whether it's, introducing one new vegetable, or making one simple swap that's going to increase fiber, one little simple change that will build momentum. And then the next week you can try something else. But I think it's just having one small thing to focus on, because otherwise it can just seem too hard.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think that's a really good tip, because it's just starting small, right? Rather than trying to climb Mount Everest, on day one, which is not possible. So I wanted to talk to you about different stages of kids' lives, right? Because nutrition needs change. So talk to me about babies, when if you're a new mum listening to this and, you're thinking, right, I want to make sure that my child has great nutrition, what should a new mum really be focusing on?
New mum should be really focusing on a stress-free introduction to solids as much as possible, because babies and young children pick up on all the anxiety around feeding. And I think we can actually create a lot of problems early on if we're too stressed about feeding. We really want to let children get messy with food. We really want to throw as much variety at babies as possible. We want to keep the salt and the sugar out, obviously, but really giving children, babies especially, a really good variety of exposure to new foods and just letting them have fun and get messy with it. Don't expect them to eat a lot, but just let them explore food, because that's really how they develop familiarity and trust in food that later means acceptance of that food. But they may not accept that food, the first 10 or 15 times that they touch it and get it all through their hair. As parents, that can stress us out and make us feel like they're being a fussy eater, or they hate that food, my cooking's bad, and everything that goes on in your mind. But really, it's just babies just need a lot of time and exposure with food, and they need it in a very relaxed, stress-free environment. And as a parent, if you're really worried about what they're eating and you're kind of hovering over them or shoving food in their mouth, that's going against what we call responsive feeding.
Okay.
So we really want to try and stay calm, give them lots of variety, lower your expectations. And really with food, it's just introducing those foods one at a time, but not like 1 week at a time. We don't want to do it that slowly. Yeah. I mean, I've got a Feeding Babies program as well that talks you through all of this, and introducing the allergenic foods is something that's really important to get in before the age of 12 months, because it's really important that we are exposing our children to these food proteins so that their gut, their immune system builds what we call a tolerance to it. So we're reducing the risk of our children developing allergies, because 10% of Australian kids have allergies. So it's about introducing food in a way that's going to help reduce their risk of developing a food allergy.
Yeah, great. So what I'm really hearing there is patience is the key thing.
Patience and trying to stay calm. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then when they move into that kind of 4 to, I suppose 8 or 9 age group, is there a specific need for certain nutrients as their bodies and minds are growing?
Yeah, so that's where I think we really need to focus on those slow release, good quality carbohydrates to give them energy, to get them throughout the day, because they are learning, they're absorbing things. They can get tired really easily, and so it's really important that their sugar levels are stable in their blood. We want to give them foods that keep their sugar levels stable. We don't want those fast sugars shooting their sugar levels up and then dropping them down. It's kind of like a shark tooth blood sugar level, and we don't want that. So another nutrient that's at risk in this younger age group is iron. We see a lot of kids, 20% of kids, younger kids don't get enough iron. And we do see a lot of deficiency these days, and iron can impact on behaviour, it can impact on energy levels. So it's really important that we are feeding our children iron-rich foods, whether it's animal or plant-based. It doesn't matter as long as they're getting enough iron.
And why is there an increased iron deficiency in kids nowadays?
I think it's associated with children loving a white diet. So they love a white diet and they love a lot of dairy, and dairy also inhibits iron absorption. So too much milk, too much dairy, yogurt, cheese, and too much just white processed foods. Yeah. None of that is high in iron, and so that's going to increase their risk of iron deficiency.
Yeah, wow. And then when we get into teens, does their diet and nutritional needs significantly change then, because they're going into puberty and they're growing and everything's changing?
Yeah, you need to fill them up. And I find that the after-school snack of just a crackers and cheese and hummus, whatever platter, is not going to cut it. So I feel like you need to change your mindset and really give them more wholesome, heavier foods, perhaps after school, especially if they're then going on to multiple sports, not eating dinner until 8:30 at night. Yeah. And that's where you really need to be feeding them some more, again, carbohydrate rich, but also rich in protein, just so it's helping them to stay fuller. That's where really healthy proteins, healthy fats is also important, just so they're feeling full throughout the day. Making sure that they start the day with a good breakfast, because otherwise they're not going to be able to get through that morning. They need to concentrate at school. Yeah. And if their blood sugar levels are really low by 9 a.m, then they're going to struggle to concentrate and learn as well. And that's really important as they're getting into their teens.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is there some signs that if parents are listening to this and their kids are a little bit older and, maybe they're learning more about nutrition now, are there any signs of micronutrient deficiencies in kids that you can highlight to look out for?
So iron deficiency is one that's more obvious to see, but another one that will definitely impact on immune function is a low fiber intake. So not feeding the gut what it needs will definitely impact the immune system negatively. So whilst you can't see it, really focusing on giving them plenty of fiber-rich foods is going to help their gut health and help their immune health. And that's really important in their teens as well, because they've got to get through the day, they've got to get through their studies, their sports, lots going on. So that's really important.
Yeah. And in the kind of teens era, where we've got girls obviously going through puberty and starting menstruation, boys going through puberty and all kind of things happening. Is there any specific foods or nutrients other than the protein and the iron that they should go, this is going to help with those hormones and those fluctuating moods? Because my eldest is nearly 14, and we're very much in that stage, and so we do a lot with like you say, fiber and protein and big breakfast. We've always been quite good on that. But is there anything else that you would recommend to start incorporating into diets of kids who are going through that stage?
Great question. I think as long as they are getting all the fundamentals of the good quality protein, the carbohydrates, plenty of plant foods, what you really need to do is avoid some of the foods that are going to worsen how they feel. So caffeine, artificial colours, preservatives, all that junk, that's actually going to worsen how they feel and therefore impact on their concentration, their mood, their behaviour and everything. So I think trying to keep their intake as clean as possible, which is a nice layer on top of that important fundamental, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk to us, because there's lots of parents will be listening to this, and I think that, like I said, we don't want anyone to feel guilty, we don't want anyone to feel bad, but it's just about understanding what is the impact of a diet which is highly processed, which is a lot of sugar, because obviously we're all just here today getting through. But if a child is having a diet which is high in processed food, high in sugar, and it's and it's common, it's a daily thing, what are some of the risks long term, or as soon as they stop that diet, will it be negated? Like what's the risk factor?
So there's two things. There's metabolic programming. And also development of taste preferences. So from a metabolic programming perspective, from a young age, children have metabolic programming. I mean, from in utero, really. But that is established in that first 1,000 days and also into their childhood. So we know that we know that children that are overweight and obese at the ages of 2 are increased risk of obese and overweight at the age of 6 and also 12.
Wow.
And then those children are at increased risk of heart problems and being overweight and obese in adulthood. And so we know that being unhealthy and overweight and having poorer metabolic programming as a child will increase your risk of health problems as an adult. And that's one concern. The other is the taste preferences. So when children develop these preferences for salty, sweet, fatty, the food companies, the giants, they know exactly how to basically switch on all the senses in our brain, and they know how to make food addictive. And so children that are, addicted to these foods or prefer salty or sweet drinks are more likely to carry these taste preferences with them into adulthood, and then that increases their risk of being unhealthy as an adult. And so it's not only the internal metabolic programming and the things that you can't see already, so the increases in, the fats in your blood, increase in insulin, perhaps becoming even a bit insulin resistant. So we see unhealthy teens becoming, at risk of type 2 diabetes. Wow. So those are things you can't see, but will definitely increase their risk in adulthood. But it's also those taste preferences that are a problem.
And just you mentioned then about the drinks. I mean, obviously a lot of kids will drink the sugary drinks, right? I mean, there's an enormous marketing industry around that. And as you mentioned before, you start with making just one change. What would be your advice if your child is drinking, maybe a can a day or 2 cans a day of a sugary soft drink? And they're like, I don't know, in the early teens or even younger, how to stop that, because if they're I suppose consuming that and they're used to it, the child's going to go, I don't want to stop doing that. So from a parent's perspective, what do you think are some options to kind of pull them away from that? Because it is so damaging, right?
It is very damaging, and it depends on your child and how they will respond. I mean, the best option is to just stop them, but obviously that's probably going to get a lot of pushback and perhaps not going to happen. So I would look at either reducing the frequency, so saying you can have them on the weekends but not during the week. You could look at swapping to fruit juice, 100% fruit juice to start with for most of the drinks. But then, yes, that is still, sugar. But it's going to be a better option than the soft drink, but you would then need to reduce that as well. So I think moving to moving to fruit juice, 100% orange juice, I would go for, or moving to soda water.
Yeah.
And then really ultimately trying to reduce it down to just on the weekends or not at all. Because ideally it's not at all, but realistically just on the weekends.
I mean, have you ever found, I find with my kids, and I don't know if you found with your clients, is that I explain to them the reason. So I'll say, look, when I'm not here and you have to make choices, it's important to make these choices because these foods are not healthy. And we've even had the conversation where my youngest will say, well, it's got a 4-star health rating. And then I had to explain to him about that and how that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good choice, and just trying to talk to them about what are the risks for their health. And I don't know why, whether it's just my kids, I don't know whether they're lying to me or they're listening to me, I don't know, but they certainly seem to take it on board and they make healthier choices when I'm not around. Do you think there's something in that people can talk to their child and not frighten them, not scare them to death, but just explain what are the risks if you consume this food all the time?
I think it's at a certain age you can have that conversation. I'd probably say under 10 it's tricky.
Yeah.
But over 10 you may get some buy-in. I think it really depends on how it's explained, and definitely the most important thing is explaining the why.
Yeah.
But then it's going to be really up to the child as to whether they actually take that on board. And you're lucky, I think, you've done it in a way that you really have explained and understood, and your child has taken that on board, which is wonderful. And I'd certainly encourage parents to do that, because I think that's really powerful, and it's empowering the child and it's trying to educate them to then, take ownership of their health. Yeah. So I definitely would encourage parents to do that in children over the age of 10. Yeah. And then in children under the age of 10, I think it's really about setting up a really effective environment which supports your child's health. Yeah. And don't be afraid to say no. Yeah. Just because, 5 other kids are having soft drink after cricket, it doesn't mean that you have to say yes to your child. So yes, pester power is real, and they'll always come at you. Oh, but everyone else is. But feel confident to be that parent that says no, because you are doing the right thing for your child's health. It doesn't mean they don't ever get treats, and I'm a big believer of allowing children to feel like they are having treats, because if you don't, then they will start sneaking food. It becomes a forbidden fruit, and then you create a bigger problem. Yeah. But in terms of soft drinks, I do feel as parents we should have the confidence to just say no. Yeah. And be okay with that. Yeah,
I agree. And I'm the same. Like, I'll say you can have an ice cream on the weekend, you can do things, but it's not an everyday food. And, it's your choice to be healthy or not, and I think that certainly for me, it's helped empower them make those right decisions, because, they do learn about these things in school as well. So it's basically reiterating what they're learning as well, that you need to make healthy choices, which I think is important. And I think the other thing that you touched on before is that these companies who make all this sugary, highly processed food, they're in it to make money. They didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to make this great product that's great for kids and that's healthy for them. They woke up going, how can I make as much money as possible? And that's what they do it for. They don't care about what the impact of the health is on the kids. They just care about money. And the majority of them, if not all of them, have got shareholders, and it's all about money. And I think it's important for us to know that. It's important. I mean, I personally think that whenever I buy from anything, from anywhere, I look at who owns that company and what their reason is for existing. And, most of the time when you delve a little bit deeper, you realize their reason for existing is to make money from you. They don't actually care. And I think that for parents to start looking not just at labels, which are super important, but also what is the purpose behind that company trying to sell things to your child? Because the majority is they don't care. They just want to make lots of money. And it's up to you to inform yourself so that you make better choices for your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Now, the other topic I want to talk about is fussy eaters, because I'm sure there's women and parents listening to this and saying, it all sounds great, but my kids won't eat a vegetable or won't do this. What is some of you, because I know on your courses and everything you do, you spend a lot of time in this area. So share with us some really actionable tips for kids who are absolutely fussier than fussy can be and will not eat a vegetable or will not eat fruit.
Yeah. So I think to start with, you have to understand why they're fussy.
Yeah.
Like, why are they eating the way they are? Because there's about 10 reasons why children will eat a certain way, and it's about trying to understand first and foremost why they are fussy, because if you try to apply a fix that doesn't match the underlying cause, it's never going to work. So you see on Instagram, make a funny face out of food or, and try that at dinner time. But if that's not, if they've got sensory issues, then it's not necessarily going to be the right fix. It's like a car. You can't fix a car properly until you understand why it's broken down. So I think for parents, it's about first understanding exactly why their child is fussy. And it may be for sensory reasons. It may be that they don't like food touching on their plate. It may be that they are truly disgusted by a food, and there's a condition called neophobia. It may be because they weren't exposed to a variety of foods enough as a baby and as a toddler. It may be that they're iron deficient, so they don't have an appetite. There's a whole number of reasons why. It may be because they are highly stressed at the dinner table because of the family environment, or it may be that they're only served the same foods all the time because mum's given up because she's just exhausted.
Yeah.
So there's a number of reasons why a child might be fussy. And first of all, it's trying to understand and perhaps asking the child themselves, why don't you want to eat that? And delving a little deeper into that to then be able to understand why. So maybe, my daughter even, it was probably a couple of months ago, she said, Mum, I don't like sweet, mushy vegetables. And she's now 12, and she had come to that conclusion herself. But then I've thought back over her childhood, and she's never liked the pumpkin, the zucchini, anything mushy, and it was a real textural issue for her. So perhaps if I'd actually thought about it more and put it into a different form, then she may have accepted it more. So I think it's trying to understand, first of all, why, and perhaps then trying to create a plan that's going to help expand their intake, and whether that is getting them more involved in food, because that can help to empower children to break down the barriers, to make them more familiar and trust food more, because sometimes it's a trust factor. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting down together as a family and not talking about food. Like that's that. And I'm honest in terms of the benefits that you can achieve so quickly just from that. So I ran recently a 5 Days to Healthier Kids challenge, and on day 2 we talked about fussy eating. And the challenge that night was to make one positive change at the dinner table with your child. And a lot of them really focused on creating a happy environment and not talking about food. And just from that one night, the number of wins and successes that they had with their children eating differently and eating better, because they didn't talk about food, pressure them into eating food. It was a happy environment. There was their safe foods on the plate, but other vegetables and things that they didn't necessarily usually eat also either on the plate or on a side learning plate. The parents were eating, everyone was happy. The wins and the changes that the children made in terms of what they ate at that dinner time, because it was a happy environment.
Yeah.
Food wasn't talked about. There was no pressure. There was no bribes. It was phenomenal just from that one evening.
Yeah, wow.
So not making a big deal about what they do or don't eat, but repeatedly, day in, day out, having healthy foods around that you're eating in front of them. Role modeling is so huge.
Yeah.
And as parents, we are so busy. Often a lot of children are eating on their own.
Yeah, right.
They're eating on their own. They're eating in front of a screen. They're not seeing their parents eat healthy foods. They're not seeing their role models eat. And so that impacts on their I guess, exposure to foods. It impacts on their willingness to try new foods. So eating with children is another big one. Eating together, role modeling healthy eating behaviours. But when children see their parents enjoying food, it significantly increases the chance of them eating that food.
And that makes complete sense, but also it's quite scary because you think of where the world's going and the busyness and the lack of families sitting down and eating. Is that going to have a detrimental effect on the long term, kids coming through and not seeing that role modeling?
Yeah, it impacts on more than just food too. It impacts their social and emotional health. Yeah. So there's longitudinal studies looking at families that eat dinner together. And more importantly than what the child eats at that meal, the risk of teen pregnancy, substance abuse is a lot higher in children that don't eat with their families, because it's really an opportunity for the family to come together and check in on life. How are you going? How's your day? And that's when those problems come up, and it's really one of the few times that the family has to communicate together.
Oh, it's so important, isn't it?
So,
and it's something that when I grew up, we did it all the time. But and me and my husband do make a concerted effort to sit down, 4 or 5 times a week. But with sport and things like that, sometimes
it's
we
really
can't.
hard.
But it is. You're right. We sit down, and one of the things we love most actually is when we go on holiday. It's all together, and we talk, and we just get all a chance. Without screens, without sleepovers, without play dates, just to be together and
Connect.
just talk. And it's one of my favourite things about when we go on holiday is just having that time when we're all sitting there, breakfast, lunch and dinner, eating together and talking together. And it's beautiful. It's so nice.
Yeah, and you can't underestimate the subconscious impact of that moment together on what your child will eat. Like there's a direct relationship there.
It's fascinating. Now, to finish off, with kids who are fussy eaters and, are perhaps not getting the whole nutrient spectrum they need to get, was there any specific supplements you would recommend to try and, address some of those deficiencies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get asked that a lot with especially the mums inside my Nourishing Kids membership. They often ask me about iron because often the child will have had a blood test and will be iron deficient. Yeah. In fact, I only saw on Instagram this morning I had a question about iron supplements, and my response was, with iron, it really depends on whether the child is actually deficient, whether they've had a blood test for deficiency, or whether you're just worried about their iron levels, because that's probably one of the biggest nutrients that will be at risk in a fussy eater. So if you're worried that it's just, perhaps a bit on the low side, then you can go and get one from the chemist that's got about 5 milligrams of iron, and that's completely fine to give a child. But you can't give a child high doses of iron supplements, which are also available from the chemist, unless they've had a blood test, because then it's risky, then it can become toxic. So you want to be very careful with iron supplementation at high doses, unless you really know what you're dealing with and you've got a blood test. But for fussy eaters, a bit of iron isn't a bad thing. A bit of zinc can often help as well. Especially if children are sick, I recommend getting like a mixture of zinc, vitamin C, and perhaps echinacea or antigraphis. There's a couple of brands there that are quite good.
And you can just go to the chemist.
You can just go to the chemist to get those. Aside from when they're sick or you're worried about their iron levels, I think trying to focus on plenty of plant foods, because that will give them most of their vitamins that they need. It's just with fussy eaters that are living the white diet life, the iron and the zinc are often the ones at risk. Yeah, especially iron, because the fussy eaters on a white diet will often have dairy and there's a bit of zinc in that, but not iron. So, and that's often the one that I'll get questions about.
And just finally, I know I said final, but I've got more.
That's all right.
With the white diet life you mentioned, I'm presuming bread is a huge part of that. Is there a different type of bread that still looks white that's better? Like I find that I'll buy sourdough. And my kids like that, and it's great, and it doesn't last as long because it's all sourdough and fresh. But I know a lot of people go for that kind of the Wonder White type bread, which is just, it is what it is. But is there a better option if your kids will only eat the white bread?
If there's no worries about iron, I would go for a white sourdough.
Okay.
Because it is a better option. It's fermented and it is a healthier option. It's released, the sugars are released more slowly, and it's a healthier option. If you can move them to a wholemeal sourdough, even better. And it's fresh, so there's no preservatives, there's no additives, nothing that's in those, products on the supermarket shelf. I'm not going to name and shame a particular brand, but if however iron is of a concern, which often it is, that's when those, the Wonder Whites and the Tip Tops and whatnot, they have iron fortified bread.
Yes, they do.
And they offer a significant, contribution to a child's daily iron intake if they'll eat those.
So that's a gooder option, you're saying. A gooder is not a word, but a better option if iron is concerned.
Yeah, but then they do have some additives and preservatives.
Yep.
So it's really weighing up what's the priority. If there's no concerns about deficiency, then I definitely go for a sourdough, whether it's a white, a wholemeal or a grainy. Yeah. Otherwise, definitely a Baker's Delight fresh bread is another good option. The wholemeal fresh bread will still have some iron. It's not going to be fortified, but it will have some iron. But if they're not going to eat wholemeal, then going for either a white sourdough or a white iron fortified option in the supermarket is your best bet. So some of those will have added fibre as well.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not as good as having the whole grains. I mean, the best would be fresh whole grain, but we're not talking about best practice here. We're talking about fussy eaters. So it's really... Don't feel guilty wherever you are. As I say to parents, wherever you are, just try to improve on it a tiny bit. But even if you're at a basic supermarket white level, try to put something that's healthier with it. Yeah. Rather than just Vegemite, perhaps try a bit of peanut butter or a bit of avocado. Healthy protein and healthy fat will actually help slow down the release of sugar. Yeah. So pairing foods up together can actually improve on a poorer white bread option. There's always room for improvement. Never feel guilty. And look, if that's where you're at, there's no judgment. I always like to look at a nutritionally balanced week rather than a nutritionally balanced day. It just helps parents feel less guilty about a particular meal. Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, this has been fantastic. And I know so many parents will be listening to this going, thank you, that's so great. You have an incredible website, Nourish with Karina, which is a fantastic resource for all parents who've got, whether you've got fussy kids or whether you've got just kids you want to give more nutrition to as well. So thank you for being with us today and thank you for sharing your amazing knowledge. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.